Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to PsychoBible, babbling about psychology and theology. Now, I said in last week's video that the next video would be a story time. And this is a story that I've been sitting on for a few years. It happened in 2018, and I've been hesitant to share it because I didn't want to slander or gossip. But with everything that's going on right now in the world and in the church, this story really could be beneficial for others as an illustration for everything I've been talking about in my recent videos, about unity in the church, about having to part ways at times over doctrinal disagreements, or rather particular members of the body or people who claim to be Christians not adhering to Orthodox teaching, and having to make some tough decisions. And this is interesting timing for me to talk about this because it's about a youth conference we always used to go to for years that was always held the last weekend of February, which just passed. And so this is a story about why I had to part ways as a workshop speaker and as a youth leader, a youth pastor, who would bring my youth group to PCTC. It used to be called the Pennsylvania Christian Teen Conference. Then in 2015 they changed the name to Pursue Christian Teen Conference. So it was always held the last weekend of February in Harrisburg, PA. We had a lot of great memories there. We loved this youth conference. My wife and I first started attending as chaperones as part of our old church. I won't get the name. And it was a big church, and so they had a lot of youth in this group. And so we started off as volunteers in 2009. So we attended our first year as chaperones, and I was blown away by just seeing all these youth from all over the region just coming together, worshiping God, going to different workshops. The workshops most of them were excellent. They were on a variety of topics, whether they were about understanding different Christian doctrines, about missions, or relationships, dating and sex, let's see, how to build your faith, how to deal with different cultural issues. There was one workshop that really stood out to me that first year that was about the topic of ghosts and supernatural phenomenon and how to understand that stuff from a biblical point of view. It was very well done. And so it sparked in me this idea, these workshop leaders seem to be just regular people from a variety of backgrounds with different levels of expertise. And I was like, I wonder if I could do a workshop. They seem to be willing to talk about very difficult subjects. And so my niche, being homosexuality, I figured, let me see if I can do a workshop on homosexuality from a truly Christian perspective. So I made an inquiry, how do you become a workshop speaker? And someone from the committee told me, well, here's the protocol. You just, there's one person every year who's in charge of the workshops. You send that person an outline of your entire workshop that you have planned, so everything that you're going to say. Send that to them by August. The committee will review it, and then if they approve, they'll let you know by November, and then you can make any final touches to it, and then you're good to go. So I started doing some workshops for them, and my first workshop I did was in 2010 about myths about homosexuality. And here I was, I feel like I'm a nobody here at this conference, only my second year, but it was well attended. They put me in a small room, but we packed out that room. Everyone wanted to come to see this workshop. And I can say with confidence that I presented this topic in a very well balanced manner, to the point where there were a few moms who were attending as chaperones, and they came to the workshop, and they're sitting in the front. And after my workshop, they told me they were getting nervous, and they started texting their pastor, because I start the workshop off by just describing the phenomenon of having same-sex attraction. Not from my own personal experience, but from working with so many guys in my support group that I would lead at my old college. And in doing my internship experience with an Exodus ministry And so I was just describing how difficult that is to be a Christian who has these convictions about your sexuality and about what God's law is and about God's design for our sexuality, but having these attractions that seem to go against it, and not knowing what to do with them, and not knowing who you can share it with, and the historical problem of the church not addressing this in a very loving manner, and so they may be condemned. And so I really just described the plight of Christians who are struggling with same-sex attraction. So they were worried that I was going to present a pro-gay perspective. So they're texting their pastor, what should we do? This guy seems like he's going to start blaspheming. But then I described the different myths, and the myths about, I addressed myths about people are either born that way or it's a choice, and both are myths. Having the attractions is neither biologically determined, nor is it just a simple matter of a choice. In fact, there's more of a variety of factors that contribute to having same-sex attraction. And then I also go into the myths about this being the worst of all sins, but also the myth that it's not a sin at all. It's okay to act out on your same-sex attractions. And so I'm presenting, this is the solid biblical view, not going into either of those extremes, the pro-gay or the so anti-gay that you exaggerate how terrible it is and just bring more shame and condemnation upon people who are just dealing with the attractions. But I make it very clear that Scripture states unequivocally that the homosexual behavior is a sin, and relationships are not allowed as Christians. And I get into the science, I get into Scripture, all within like 45, 50 minutes. So I crammed a lot in there. But it was a very well-regarded workshop, and after every conference, around Easter time, so conference is the end of February, then around April or end of March, they do a sort of a recap meeting with the committee, or anyone's really allowed to go, but I was always so busy and I didn't have much vacation days, so I never really got to attend those planning committee meetings. So they plan the following year's conference and discuss how things went at the conference that had just passed. And I always got great feedback about my workshop. So 2010 I did myths about homosexuality. And then 2011 I did a workshop called Who Do You Think You Are? And it was a workshop about your identity and your self-worth. And really it was based a lot on the things that had impacted me in my own life and helped me understand my identity in Christ. And so that was another well-regarded workshop. There was a time I remember bumping into one of the moms in an elevator, and she told me, I'm going to tell my kids to always go to one of your workshops because they're so well done and biblically based, but also very compassionate. And so that was 2011. And interestingly, after that year, we changed churches. And so I wasn't really planning on going to the conference, and I was now starting grad school 2012. So I'm going to be too busy to do a workshop or attend as a chaperone. I'm not really part of a youth group at this point. But the conference actually contacted me leading up to the 2012 PCTC and requested that I do the Myths About Homosexuality workshop again. So I did it a second time. This was my third time doing a workshop, second time doing the Myths About Homosexuality, and it was by request. So that's just some background about my involvement as a speaker at PCTC. Well then, 2013 comes, and now I'm a youth pastor. So I'm in grad school, I'm working, my life was so busy. It's always been busy. It's so very, not busy, let's say productive, very active. So here I am, I'm working a full-time office job. I'm in grad school, not to mention my office job, I got a promotion as a supervisor, and then I'm in grad school, and then while I'm in grad school, I become the youth pastor of our church. Now it's a small youth group, like a dozen kids. That's a story for another time. That was a very trying experience. But I was youth pastor for several years, from 2013 to 2018. And So once my wife and I became youth pastors, we're like, well, we want to start taking our youth group to PCTC. Uh, and so that's what we started doing. And I would get the itch to start doing workshops again, but managing my youth group was really tough. I'm like, there's no way I can leave my youth group and then go do a workshop. I need to keep an eye on these kids. They're all over the place. But after a few years of taking our youth groups there, and they had great experiences, and it was always pretty solid. There were some workshop speakers that said some things that were a little off, and it caused a bit of a furor here and there. But for the most part, I was confident bringing my youth group to this conference. And then 2017, I was thinking, you know what? I think it's time I can get back to doing a workshop. And I had God put in my heart to do a workshop on gender. I've been studying theology of the body, and I'm seeing coming down the pike how important the issue of gender is going to be. That this is an issue the church really needs to start addressing. It's now getting to the point where saying a boy is a boy and a girl is a girl is controversial, that they cannot change sexes, that you cannot be a boy inside a girl's body. But I wasn't even necessarily going to talk about transgenderism. I just want to talk about what it means to be male and female, just the significance of that. So we went to the planning committee for 2018, and I talked to the upcoming president for the conference and said, how do I submit a workshop? Because I know in the past you just submit your outline and then it gets reviewed, and I was okay if it didn't get approved. I just wanted the opportunity. And I submitted a few different ideas. My wife and I had some ideas. She was going to lead like an after-hours prayer night, or no, worship. She was going to lead an after-hours worship room. And so we had that idea. We have some other suggestions for the conference, and then I had my outline. I submitted most of my ideas that I would talk about in my outline. And so this was 2017 leading into the 2018 conference. Never hear back from him. But my wife, she hears back and she gets approved for her idea. So I'm like, I guess they didn't approve my workshop. I'm like, okay, fine. But then I see when we get the brochure for the coming workshop that they did have a workshop planned to address LGBT issues. And I noticed it was by someone I knew, sort of a former colleague of mine. I used to work at a major counseling center in the southeastern PA region, and this was one of the counselors who used to work at that counseling center. Now, I was just in the office staff at the time, and he was a therapist. And he was a Christian therapist, and he was also a youth minister, so he would bring his youth group to PCTC as well. His name is Tom. And it's interesting because years ago, when we used to work at the same counseling practice, the clinical director and the director of the Christian counseling services, because this was a mainstream counseling practice, but we offered Christian counseling as a specialty. So there's a sort of a subgroup of Christian therapists there. And so the clinical director of the Christian counselors, she had known about the work I was doing at my college, leading a workshop for guys dealing with sexual addiction and unwanted same-sex attraction. And so this particular counselor was dealing with some teenagers with unwanted same-sex attraction. And so she told him about me. And so he met with me one day, bought me lunch, and he picked my brain. And because he didn't have any real experience in working with people with SSA. So this is going back to like 2011 or something. So it's going back several years, 2010 maybe. So I met with him and I explained to him my experience, type of work I do, and I even wrote up a whole curriculum for him. It was my own curriculum that I had made, but I modified it a bit more to suit the group that he was hoping to lead with these teenagers. So this is sort of my background with this guy, going back several years. So I already knew him. When I saw that he's going to be leading a workshop, I was like, all right, fine. He had done a workshop the year prior about pornography, and it was well done. So I'm like, okay, all right, I guess he was able to get a workshop in instead. But I noticed it was only for leaders. And a lot of the youth in my youth group were like, well, I want to attend this one. This would be interesting. And I'm like, I'm sorry, guys, it's only for leaders. I don't know why they're not making it available to the youth as well. So I attended, and there's some red flags that came up for me. I mean, I like him, and I know he's mostly coming from the Orthodox position, but he wasn't really doing much teaching. It was pretty much, here's the different considerations if your church is going to do a discussion about LGBT issues, and he presented the different positions. So it was mostly just presenting these are different options, and they had a Q&A session, and there's a lot of confusion in the Q&A session, and a lot of different points of view that were coming up that could have been clarified if he had done some teaching on what we believe as Bible-believing Christians, especially as a youth conference made up of evangelical churches, which was supposed to be caring about the Bible. So I walked away kind of confused about what the purpose of that workshop was. But I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt since we had a history together. And so then we come time to go to the planning committee for 2019's PCTC. Now, it's a 2-day planning committee meeting, and I had to work. It's a Tuesday and Wednesday, so I had to work the Tuesday one. My wife went ahead of me, and I met her that night after they did their first session of just discussing the previous conference. And so she fills me a little bit about some things, and then I come to the Wednesday one, and I just asked, hey, so like what's the protocol now to do a workshop? And that apparently was the problem that I brought that up, because apparently now they had changed the protocol. And because I was just like, I thought the procedure before was that you submit an outline and you find out in November if you got chosen, and I'm fine if I wasn't chosen. I just want to know, how do I do something? I would like to do, well, there's several workshop ideas I had, but the one I really would like to do is on gender. And so they kind of dismissed my question, and they told me, well, talk to the incoming president afterwards. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. So first I talked to the past president. He explained, yeah, I'm sorry, we changed the procedure. We're now just doing workshop speakers by recommendation. I'm like, okay. You guys know I used to do workshops here, like 3 years in a row. It's going back several years, but still, it's not like I'm a nobody or like I'm a stranger to this conference. So I'm sure there's plenty of people that can vouch for me. But I was being treated like I was a fresh face. So it's kind of strange. But I said, all right, I understand. I understand the procedure has changed. So, but then I met with the next president of the conference, Matt, and the treasurer of the conference, Paige, a male, and the executive director, Jeff. Now, he was in and out of the conversation, but I started meeting with them. And so I tell them, hey guys, I just met with Scott. I understand that the procedure has changed. Okay, so I understand that, but if you guys are willing to consider me, here's my background. I've done workshops here before. I'm a youth pastor as well as a therapist, and I specialize in working with people with sexual issues. So it would be great if I could do a workshop on gender. Just gender is just the thing I want to do. And I reminded them that I had done workshops there in the past. And they told me, yeah, but Andrew, a lot of things have changed since then. And they proceeded to tell me how they're really concerned about doing anything about gender or sexuality or homosexuality in general for youth to attend, because an increasing number of churches that attend the conference are now becoming LGBT affirming. And they're worried that if they engage in this debate in the church, that they will lose churches that have come and they'll lose money. This is actually what Paige told me, the treasurer. He was worried that they would lose money by fewer churches attending if we start talking about this issue. And so clearly things had changed. And so I told them, well, it would be a real shame if you guys were scared of cultural backlash. And that was the reason why you would stop speaking the truth. And so I've made it very clear that this does not sound like the right approach to take. We should not be scared to speak the truth, guys. And how do we go from you guys actually inviting me to do a workshop on homosexuality to now you guys being too scared to talk about it? And they start telling me that, well, actually, we're looking into another group, some other organization to come in and do a workshop to train up pastors and how to have conversations in their churches about LGBT issues. And Matt was telling me, because he's really concerned about LGBT, lesbian, gay, and transgender people leaving our churches. And that was his main concern. He's really concerned about LGBT people leaving our churches, LGBT Christians leaving our churches, which that terminology indicated to me something about where he was coming from. And so we had a pretty long conversation, and I left, and I looked up this organization he was telling me about. It's called LOVEboldly. That should have been a red flag right there, what type of group this is. But you go on their website, and you look at the board, and it's all these individuals who are very gay-affirming, or they are LGBT themselves. And their whole mission is to facilitate conversations between traditionally minded Christians and LGBT and identifying and LGBT affirming Christians so that they can foster unity. So once again, there's that word, unity. But this is not unity through integrity to the gospel. This is unity through, I'm not sure, because it's not very clear how they go about this. Because it's not to persuade them to uphold the historic Christian sexual ethic. In fact, it seems more that they're going about this through influencing the traditionally minded Christians to become more gay-affirming and accepting. And because I'm looking at all the resources and I'm seeing all sorts of red flags and connections to things like the Reformation Project, which is led by Matthew Vines, a gay individual who says he's a Christian, who started this organization to try to reform the church on sexual issues and on accepting homosexuality and affirming it as and affirming gay marriage. And so coming from a very revisionist point of view. And so you see a lot of connections to the Reformation Project in LOVEboldly. And I see some names in there that Tom had mentioned in his workshop. And some people that are connected with Revoice, a conference that upholds a historic Christian sexual ethic that sex is meant for marriage between a man and woman. But there's some issues I have with them in that they still affirm LGBT as an identity that just is, and they refute and just absolutely deny the possibility of doing counseling to resolve the underlying issues of same-sex attraction or gender confusion. So I'm not a fan of the Revoice movement. So there's some individuals like Nate Collins and Gregory Coles who are involved in Revoice that Tom mentioned he was trying to get to speak at PCTC. So I'm seeing connections to Revoice, I'm seeing connections to Reformation Project, all at this LOVEboldly, and it's such a mishmash. There's like the traditionally minded Christians and the absolutely gay-affirming Christians, all there represented in LOVEboldly. And this is a group that they want to come to speak to PCTC to train pastors in how to talk to their churches about LGBT issues. And I didn't see this. I didn't look this up while I was talking to the leadership team. I didn't see this until I came home. And as I'm looking through the list of the board members, who do I see on the list of board members for LOVEboldly? But Matt, the next president of PCTC. And I talked to my wife, I'm like, well, I wasn't there on Tuesday. Did they mention that Matt is on the board of directors of this LOVEboldly? Because apparently they mentioned the LOVEboldly to everyone on Tuesday, the night I wasn't there. And my wife's like, no, they didn't mention that at all. And she's looking through his website with me, and she's like, hearts sank because we love this conference. But this is the direction they're going. We're like, we can't do this. We can't participate. I'm not going to bring my youth to a conference where they're going to teach us stuff. Even if they're just teaching the leaders, I don't want to be party to something that's going to teach heresy, that's going to lead other churches astray. And so we talked to the elders and our pastor at our church, and we're like, hey, what do we do? We're thinking of just dropping, but I'm not sure if we should sound the alarm. So we prayed about it, and I decided I'm going to sound the alarm. I'm going to inform the other churches because it seems like they weren't upfront with us at that planning meeting about this group they're planning to bring in, and that the next president of PCTC is on the board of directors of this group. Now, if you go on their website now, you won't find him on there. He's not on the board any longer, but he was at the time. So I emailed the other churches that are involved in the planning committee, or at least those that attended the meeting, but I made the mistake of not including the board members. I should have just done that. I regretted it later, not necessarily because I was out of line, but it was perceived as that I was being out of line, and because I already had spoken to the leadership team, and I made my concerns clear there. Now, there were more concerns I found after looking at the LOVEboldly website, so I might as well just told them, included them in the email, because then the focus of the responses I got were just on the way I went about it, and it became a distraction. So that's my regret about how I handled things, but I do not regret contacting everyone. In fact, here's a portion of my email, because first I just introduced myself to everyone, and then here's what I say. So on Wednesday, after pretty much everyone had left, I spoke with Matt and Paige. I offered myself as a presenter for a variety of workshops, but reminded them of my niche and the workshops I had done in the past. Paige then said, but a lot has changed since then. And Matt proceeded to tell me about his desire to reach out to LGBT Christians and have a group come and do a training for leaders on how to facilitate conversations about sexuality. He said the group is called LOVEboldly. I was unable to make it to the session on Tuesday afternoon, but my wife told me Matt mentioned this group only briefly and did not explain their mission in depth. When I returned home, I looked up their website, and I linked the website. I see red flags all over their website. Officially, they state that their leadership holds varying opinions on sexual morality, and their FAQ denies having an agenda in the conversations they try to facilitate. However, in looking at their services, it's clear to me that their mission is similar to the Reformation Project, started by Matthew Vines, a gay-identified individual who leads trainings to send out people to their local churches to convert people to pro-gay theology. In fact, one of the board members of LOVEboldly is involved in the Reformation Project. LOVEboldly's devoted training seminars seem to have the same aim and tactics as the Reformation Project. And it is such a seminar that I suspect Matt intends to bring to PCTC 2019. I may be wrong if that is their agenda, and if it is, it would be enacted very subtly. But in general, every question on their website about their official stances is answered in incredibly vague terms, all in an area in which we need clarity and truth more than ever. I have no confidence that this group will support a biblical approach to sexuality, as they speak only about love but do not balance it with truth. Furthermore, apparently Matt is one of the board members of LOVEboldly. Did he mention that on Tuesday? So this isn't some outside group he's heard about. This is his own organization. We have serious misgivings about continuing to support PCTC if it goes down this path. But before making any decisions about our response, we wanted to contact everyone who we know involved to see if they share our concerns or are in agreement with this direction. And so, like I said, most of the responses I got were more directed about the way I did things and criticizing my approach. I got this one email from another youth pastor saying, how I'm more concerned about your approach to this issue than I am about the topic of your email. And she accused me of being butthurt. She actually used that word, for not being selected for a workshop the previous year. And then I eventually got an email from Tom, the one that had done the the workshop, and I didn't know if he knew the direction that they were going in, and so I emailed him as well, and it was like, hey, I'm not sure if you're aware, but it seems like they were kind of using your workshop as like field testing for bringing in pro-gay theology. And he emailed me, it's like, no, I trust Matt. He actually knows Matt. He's friends with him, apparently. And so he tried to assure me that he believes in the biblical sexual ethic. And I'm like, well, that may be, but I still have a lot of concerns. And so then he responded to that main email as well. And he added a few points here. We as a church must find a way to love people who are very different than us without an agenda of changing them. Our job is to love people. God's job is to change them if that's what he desires. As soon as someone believes our relationship is dependent upon them changing, the dialogue stops and any perceived relationship is over. The more we shy away from these types of relationships and loving dialogue, the more irrelevant the church becomes and the more polarized we become from the very people Jesus came to save. While I appreciate your concerns for a perceived direction of PCTC, I believe that I can speak with authority in my fully supporting Matt's presidency of PCTC and the direction he is trying to go to reach out to the marginalized. Hope this brings some clarity to your concerns, and I pray you can and will continue to support PCTC and its endeavors to make relevant and educated disciples for Jesus in a world that has completely lost its way. So keep note of some of the things he says there, because that comes up later. A few days after me sending out that initial email to all the churches, I was like, you know what, I really should contact the board, let them know I told all the churches this. So I contacted the remaining board members, at least the ones I had the emails for, and I told them everything that, I recapped the conversation and told them, just reiterated what my concerns were, but also added that, hey, now I also know that Matt's on the board of directors of this LOVEboldly, and I have a whole lot of concerns about this group. And so, and I apologized for sending out an email to all the other churches and not including the board. And so that was 3 days later. I didn't get a response until 3 weeks later. They never contacted me directly. Instead, they sent an email to everyone. Well, first they sent it to me. It was like a general email to me that they then CC'd everyone else on as well the next day. So, and I offered as well to meet with them with my pastor to discuss this more in depth. I wanted to really try to address my concerns more fully if they're willing to do that. They never responded to me directly. They just made a decision, and they said that they're still vetting this organization, but they're pleased with the direction they're going, and they're really concerned with the way I went about it, and they accused me of never telling them what my concerns were, and which was not true at all. So things were getting a bit out of hand at this point, and what was very discouraging was that of all the churches I contacted, only one of the pastors responded to me and said that he supported me calling the alarm and that he agreed with my concerns. The others just believed, oh no, we need to be loving. And I'm like, we've always been loving. Anyone who's gone to my workshop on the myths on homosexuality will tell you that I approached it with sensitivity and care, with nuance, no condemnation. In fact, if anything, I was strongly rebuking the church for the wrong way we've been handling this issue for decades, but also offered hope and clarity and truth. And what this pro-gay movement, this gay-affirming movement in the church is not offering is hope. And ultimately not real love, because it's just a lot of lip service. So, as this was turning into a big debacle, I sent this final email. So I'm just going to read this one in full. Thank you, executive team, and all others for your responses. I will issue this hopefully final email and then bow out. I understand your disappointment that I did not include the executives in my first email. I apologize for that in my email to the executives that I sent just a few days after my original email, but that was not acknowledged. Though the context of Matthew 18 is when a fellow believer sins against oneself, and that was not the case, it still would have been best to either include everyone initially or address the leaders, then follow up to everyone. You, the executives, claim that I did not tell Matt and Paige my concerns. I disagree. The context of Paige's statement that a lot has changed since PCTC approved and then sought out a workshop that taught truth, love, and hope regarding homosexuality several years ago was how I understood his comment as well, and hence my reply. Even more reason for us to be speaking the truth now. Matt and Paige said quite a lot in our exchange, enough for me to be certain of the shift in approach in the leadership, and for me to warn them against not teaching truth out of fear of cultural backlash. This new email from the executives reinforces that assessment. And then, realizing that perhaps I did not expound enough on my concerns, I reached out to the executives on Wednesday, April 11th. This email on April 27th was the only reply I received. Whenever I would teach on this subject, I start with this passage, 2 Timothy 4, 2-5, which has just grown more relevant every day. Preach the word. Be prepared in season and out of season. Correct, rebuke, and encourage, with great patience and careful instruction. For the time will come when men will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. But you, keep your head in all situations, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, discharge all duties of your ministry. Matt, Paige, and this email have made it clear that the leaders of PCTC are unwilling to speak truth to this subject out of fear, and in particular, fear of man. So, prior to even getting into Love Boldly, I had sufficient concern. We can tell much more about what someone believes by their actions than by their words. You all can claim to adhere to the biblical model of sexuality, but if you do not teach it, your beliefs have no impact. As pastors, we have a duty, especially to our youth, to train them up in how to think biblically and live courageously for God. The world is aggressively indoctrinating our students, and we have the opportunity when they're willingly going to a Christian conference to intervene in some way. If we value all of our teens, then why not provide them the opportunity to learn something different from what they're hearing from everywhere else? You assume that teaching biblical sexuality would be engaging in a debate. That is not necessarily an inevitable outcome, and I have several other points in response. The workshops are optional. If PCTC were unafraid to publicly be on record that they support the traditional biblical model of sexuality, then people know in advance that if a workshop on the topic is offered, what the perspective would be. If they already disagree, they have the informed decision to choose a different workshop. Or they can choose to come and listen, and if the option for discussion is closed off, the risk of debate is reduced. By not teaching on the subject, you also deprive students who are open to learning the biblical model and those who desire to be better equipped to minister to their friends or care for themselves. And this is not an avoidable subject. PCTC always offers a dating/relationship workshop. Inevitably, students are going to ask, what about same-sex dating? Will we refuse to answer out of the same fear? Don't assume that an LGBT-affirming or LGBT-identified student is solidified in that position or identity. If anything, the research shows that most teens who label themselves on the LGBT spectrum cease doing so by adulthood, of their own accord. Of course, if society and the church continue to squelch the truth, the trend might change, or students may learn more from the hard way after much dangerous experimentation. And side note, right now we're seeing research that 1 in 6 Gen Z adults identify as LGBT. So my prediction is coming true, that the more we're encouraging it, the more we're going to see them identify on that spectrum. All right, so back to my email. They're still learning and figuring out what they believe. And most of what is put out there of the biblical position are straw man arguments and caricatures. A competent workshop could be their first exposure to an accurate presentation of biblical truth on this subject, where there's so much confusion. If the truth, no matter how it's presented, offends them, you're not helping them by protecting them from the truth, from what they fear. They're afraid to hear that what they desire to do is a sin, that they're called to carry their cross and surrender their whole lives to Jesus' lordship. You fear losing attendance at the conference and driving them farther away from Jesus. But by not facing their fears, they're also missing out on hearing a truth that sets us free from bondage. Truth that corrects our false views of God and ourselves. Truth that guides us to healing. And you miss out on participating in that plan of God. We need to teach truth and hope out of love and trust God with the consequences. Look at Jesus. He always spoke the truth, and he wasn't afraid to lose followers over it. John 6:53-66. Okay, so maybe you don't want to take the chance of chaos erupting by just offering a workshop on sexuality for teens to attend. And so you prefer to train up the pastors to do this work. Fine, that's an acceptable second option, and it needs to happen either way. Then actually do a training on how to defend against pro-gay/revisionist theology. Do a training on theology of the body and God's purposes for our sexuality, on how to minister evangelistically to people affected by same-sex attraction and gender confusion, on how to better understand the experiences of people with SSA and the common contributing factors to their SSA, on how to refute just plain hateful views against homosexual people without compromising truth, on how to walk alongside a fellow brother or sister in Christ who is struggling with these issues, and disciple this person to carry one's cross and find fulfillment ultimately in Christ, on how to foster the development of normative sexuality in our families and help strugglers to fulfill unmet needs, and on how to offer practical help to those who want it. If those are our goals in such a training, then I know of plenty of resources. Forget about me. We could invite a ministry such as Restored Hope Network or Day 7 Ministries where I work, which is based right in Central PA where we do the workshop, where we do the conference. Or a teacher in apologetics such as Dr. Michael Brown or Dr. Robert Gagnon. He's even in Pennsylvania, at least at the time he was. Or someone from Stand to Reason, or Christopher West, the main teacher of Theology of the Body, also from PA. I suspect you did not consider these options if you already determined that you do not want to risk offending the LGBT-affirming churches. Furthermore, does it not concern you all that there is a growing number of gay-affirming churches at PCTC? I'm not sure how true that is, but that's what Paige stated, and as the numbers guy, I guess he would know. But no, instead of training on how to minister to those affected by these issues, or how to understand and defend the biblical position, Matt told me he wants to do a training on how to have conversations about sexuality. What is there to converse about? Was Tom's workshop this year, particularly the discussion portion, a pilot for this approach? I don't know if it was his choice or the leadership's choice to make his workshop just for sponsors and pastors. I really appreciate Tom's ministry work, and I would have really liked to have seen him teach. However, he gave only a survey of considerations regarding the huge topics of homosexuality and gender, and then opened the floor to discussion. I likely stand alone in this view, but I did not find the discussion, however civil it may have been, to be fruitful at all. One lady still argued, but if they're born that way, how can it be wrong? Clearly, the leaders present still need some better teaching and theological training. Tom could have preempted confusion there in the lecture portion, but the core points of the revisionists were not addressed and rebutted. And not only did Matt tell me he wants a training on how to have conversations, but the rationale he gave was because LGBT Christians are leaving our churches. And that spoke volumes to me, even before he told me about LOVEboldly. We ought to consider a conflict when one claims to identify with Christ, but also continue to identify by one's sin. Or more likely in the LGBT case, try to justify one's sin. And to be clear, the LGBT labels do not mean just having same-sex attraction or gender confusion. There's no conflict if one just has the experience, even if one is battling against giving in to the corresponding behavior. No, these self-labels mean that one is embracing these experiences as a positive aspect of one's identity. And when we keep in mind that these desires are in direct contradiction to God's design for us, it is self-defeating to identify as both LGBT and a Christ follower, even if one is trying to be celibate. In most cases I know, like Julie Rogers from Wheaton College and Exodus is a prime example, when a Christian with SSA is aiming to practice celibacy but still identifies as gay, and has given up on or never sincerely tried professional, competent help, the person grows more discouraged and will fall into the behavior and shift to justifying homosexuality. You say that you are still vetting LOVEboldly. What is left to figure out? They do not love people with SSA or gender confusion or LGBT identifying people in an evangelistic or transformative manner, as in the case of, say, a ministry like Equipped to Love, which is a ministry out of Bethel Church, which loves radically without compromising truth. LOVEboldly's mission is to reconcile LGBT affirming or identifying Christians with Christians who support the biblical model. There are only 3 ways to do this. 1, make sexuality a non-issue. But when you understand God's purpose for our sexuality and the 2 genders, especially the theological significance, you know this is not an option. And I sent a link to one of Christopher West's videos on the meaning of gender. 2, win over the LGBT side to embrace God's design and call in the traditional model. Or 3, convert the traditional side to the revisionist side. When you see the services LOVEboldly offers, the members of the board, and LOVEboldly's involvement with the Gay Christian Network and the Reformation Project, it's clear that LOVEboldly is taking the 3rd approach, maybe also the 1st approach. Yes, in my email to Tom, I added that it appears Matt is introducing pro-gay theology to PCTC in a subversive manner. And I stand by that assessment based on what Matt said in our conversation, even if he may have personal assent to the biblical model. The points I made about LOVEboldly and the fact that Matt is on the board of LOVEboldly, which was not addressed in the email and should be considered a conflict of interest. I'm even open to the likelihood that he means well and is unaware of how LOVEboldly is in conflict to the gospel. Though I challenged Matt and Paige on their fear of speaking the truth, I regret that I did not challenge them on this conversational approach. I suppose at that point I knew enough about their direction, especially when Paige started touting about how he's one of the most progressive pastors in the Northeast. That is something he was telling me, as if I would be impressed by that. A conversation implies that all sides have merit. This friendly conversational approach is the new tactic of LGBT activism to infiltrate churches, as demonstrated in this video. I linked them to a video by Tom Littleton, who was reviewing the different ways that the LGBT movement is infiltrating evangelical churches. And I had them note the 9 to 11 minute mark, how they'll use this conversational approach. And then I tell them about a Presbyterian colleague of mine told me that this shift in his church started with these conversations, then a time of reflection, and then compromise. And the only side that would compromise was the conservative side. Finally, I would like to address one of the points Tom made in his email, which I commonly hear. If the church is so concerned about being culturally relevant, we will perpetually be behind the curve since we'll be chasing trends. There's nothing innovative about constantly seeking to be relevant. Jesus never cared about being relevant in the world's eyes. Instead, he taught us what is truly relevant. The church needs to be consistent in its message, while the world fluctuates in its values and philosophies. Even now, there is a growing secular backlash against the extremes of the social justice movement and transgenderism. And there is a renewal of interest among atheists and intellectuals in the Bible. So even what it means to be culturally relevant does not necessarily mean sensitivity to the liberal end of things. Therefore, we're better prepared for the challenges in our culture if we are training our youth in how to understand and explain our beliefs and how to engage conflicting ideas in the world evangelistically, apologetically, and compassionately. If you took the time to read through this whole email, you have my appreciation. But above all, I hope you will consider my words of caution for PCTC and the larger church. The method I went about all of this may not have been the ideal, but I hope it is clear that my sincere conviction, whether you agree with it or not, was that a call needed to go out to the churches involved with PCTC about the direction of the conference and the implications. Difficult times are coming for the church. We ought to be willing to pay some price for our beliefs now, or else we will not endure the greater trials and cede more territory to the enemy. Just look at what is looming in California with AB 2943. This is back in 2018, so that was what was going on at the time. A bill that would make it illegal to offer any sort of help for same-sex attraction or gender confusion. And I know we have a similar law pending in PA as well. There is a reason why biblical sexuality and efforts to provide help for those who want it is being so viciously attacked. It is a satanic scheme against God's self-reflection upon humanity and his design and destiny for us. To acquiesce is a betrayal. So that's the end of my email. And the only responses I got after that were, please stop emailing me, from some of the people that were in the email thread. But my wife and I made a decision after that we would not be bringing our youth group to that conference any longer. And I don't know if they ever did bring LOVEboldly in, but the fact that they were that close to considering it is enough to tell me that the direction they were going. And I'm looking at this whole debacle from 3 years ago, and I would say it aged pretty well. Because now we're seeing transgenderism even more of the issue that will make or break you and get you canceled in today's culture. And we're seeing churches now scrambling to speak about it when we could have been ahead of the curve speaking about it, and that's what I had been trying to do for years at PCTC. When I would do my workshop on homosexuality, 2010 and 2012, no one was talking about homosexuality that much yet, but I told them the reason we're talking about this is because this is going to be the issue that makes or breaks the church in this generation, and you guys need to be prepared in advance. And that's why I always start my presentations with that passage from 2 Timothy. So we need to be prepared, because there is going to come a time where people will not put up sound doctrine, and that time is now. So that's why I mentioned in the last video, and it came up again in this video. And so, yeah, we're looking at things. We're looking at the laws they're trying to pass with the Equality Act. And now people are like scrambling. I've been telling you guys about the Equality Act since 2019. And now we're seeing it almost come to light. We've already had some laws passed that paved the way to it. And it's not going to be safe for Christians or churches. We can't just put our head in the sand and think we can just continue doing things the way we want. We have to engage the world, and we have to make sure our churches are firm on what we believe and why. So when I see that churches are willing to compromise and not speak truth, even at their own conference, it's not like I was asking them to go out in public, but this is a Christian conference. Students are willingly going to this conference. They know it's a Christian conference, and they're going to get biblical education. You literally have them coming to you, and you're not going to give them the truth? You're depriving them of the very thing that will set them free? That is not just a tragedy, that is an absolute betrayal. And that is why I had to part ways. Because when you care more about the way I went about things than the content, and you don't see how this movement is going to erode the integrity of God's body and disintegrate it, you're going to be taken out so easily when the real hard times really come. If you can't handle some cultural backlash from fellow people in the church. So, yeah, I hope this highlights the stuff I've been talking about in my recent videos. It was not an easy decision for my wife and I to choose a park company. We loved this conference so much. But I cannot be party to compromise. So, anyway, I hope this encourages you. Yes, it will be tough. Sometimes you got to take a bold stand, and sometimes you will stand alone. I really felt like that. I had only one other pastor reach out to me and say he agreed with me taking a stand, though he didn't share it publicly with the rest. But I knew where I stood, and thank God I had a church that backed me as well. So we need to find other like-minded believers, other churches that agree and will take a bold stand, but also have compassion. Nowhere do you ever see me condemn with harsh words people who struggle with these issues. My approach is always one to speak truth, but then offer hope and healing, and be willing to stick with someone even when they don't get that hope and that healing right away, but be willing to work with them. And that's truly loving someone. When I got some clients I'm working with right now who are just they've been hurt by the church in so many different ways, and even by different types of help that the church has offered, and it hasn't been sufficient or properly caring and compassionate. And so he's got some real chips on his shoulder. And I got to show love to that person. I got to be willing to walk with him through that struggle. I don't just preach at him and tell him, well, you still got to repent. You still got to work on changing this issue. No, I got to be willing to walk with him either way. So for them to insinuate that speaking the truth is not loving, and the approach I was taking was never loving, that's an affront to me, because I know the approach I took was always caring, always compassionate, but still full of truth and honesty. And that's what the world needs. That's what Christians need. That's what Christians who are figuring out this issue doctrinally need. And that's what Christians who are struggling with this issue in a personal way really need. So I will never apologize for speaking truth and for being passionate about this subject, whether or not it gets me canceled at some point. All right, that's it for today. This was a long one, but I hope it encourages you to stand up, to speak boldly, and to truly love others who are struggling in this area, whether that means getting yourself ostracized. All right. God bless.